the applause. I have this observation that the later in life you get, the less prone you are to receive applause. So I'm particularly grateful. It's like a child makes a mess in their pants. You're like, oh, what a wonderful job. That's your pants. And then by the time you get my age, you can't get applause. I don't know if you stop doing applause-worthy stuff or people just stop giving a shit. Probably some combination of both. But anyway, I am thrilled that you're here today, and I'm especially happy because I love this topic, pipeline management. There's as sales enablement, sales operations folks, sales technologists, there's no shortage of things you can do to improve sales performance. The problem is knowing what are the important things to do. And so I'm going to share with you a lot of research actually today about pipeline management and try to build the case that this is the real deal. Let me just start by sharing some research we did with the Sales Management Association, which is a great organization. And in this research, we asked folks, what's the frequency with which your organization expects your sales managers, your frontline sales managers, to meet with your salespeople? Right, so what's the expectation for how frequently you're going to have a pipeline review session or a pipeline coaching session? And as you can see, 72% said the organizational expectation is that they will do this more than once a month. And that resonates with how many people here, right? How often are your teams meeting? Right, weekly even, right, was the most popular answer. The research also showed that the average conversation was 53 minutes. So if you think about this, right, so you got a bunch of sales managers, say they have 10 salespeople apiece, they're meeting more than once a month with each salesperson for 53 minutes. I could build the case that this is the largest investment most companies make in sales improvement. Right? They're spending 10, 20 hours a week maybe in some cases just talking about the sales pipeline. Literally, if you start to think of it in that frame, this is probably the biggest investment your sales force is making in sales improvement. And the good news is, it matters to get it right. So this is in the same research we asked people, we said, do you feel like your organization is effective or ineffective at managing the sales pipeline? And as you can see, organizations that felt they were effective at managing the sales pipeline had revenue grow at 15% greater year-over-year rate than companies that thought they were ineffective at managing the sales pipeline. And this makes sense, because what is the sales pipeline? Right? The sales pipeline is the collection of active opportunities that your team is pursuing. Right? You're going to win these deals, the competition is going to win these deals, or no one's going to convince the buyer that it's worth doing the deal. Right? So it makes sense that if you're better at managing the sales pipeline, your revenue would grow faster than those people that aren't. So this is all a pretty rosy story until we look at how many people said they were effective and ineffective. Right? So 44% said, okay, our organization is pretty effective at doing this pipeline management stuff. 43% said they were ineffective, and 13% just couldn't make up their mind. Right? So this is being kind of neutral on it is like when I asked my wife, honey, do you still love me like you used to? And she goes, I'm kind of neutral on that question. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to say. Right? So we're going to put them right in the ineffective category. So basically what this tells me is 56% of companies acknowledge that they're ineffective at something that is probably the greatest investment they could and should be making in improving their sales performance. This stuff really, really matters. So the question becomes, okay, so how do we spend all this time doing something and yet we're still so bad at it? Let me show you just an animation here. It's about 60 seconds long that captures some of the things we see taking place inside these pipeline review sessions that are happening so frequently.
Hi, Jane. I ran some sales reports this morning that I'd like to discuss with you. It looks like you made a lot of sales calls last week. Suspiciously, it was the exact number you are required to make.
Yes. I spent Friday afternoon making up pretend sales calls to put into CRM so those numbers would look good.
Awesome. However, it looks like your sales pipeline is too small, and you're going to miss your revenue target for the quarter. I really need you to make your quota.
This should be kind of obvious, Bob, but if I knew what I needed to do to make my quota, I would already be doing it. Rather than just telling me to make my quota, perhaps you could coach me so I become a better salesperson.
I'd love to coach you, Jane, but I'm way too busy tracking your sales calls and telling you to make your quota. So please make more sales calls, grow your pipeline, and, above all, make your quota.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane.
So usually there's a little nervous laughter. I think I might have heard some genuine laughter in there. Like we know that right now as we stand here, there are sales managers having these conversations with your salespeople, right? I mean, we know this is funny because it's real life, right? So how is it that, again, this team of smart people are trying to do the right thing, but they end up doing the wrong thing? And let me draw an analogy here. So when I was in college, I was an economics major, right? That's totally legitimate. We can all agree that's legitimate, right? Okay, well, I was almost a philosophy double major. And I was just kind of transfixed by it. And I probably would have double majored if I hadn't been afraid the economic professors would have known I was over in the philosophy department. Heaven knows what would have happened if that had happened. But I was particularly kind of in love with the Greek philosophers. So take yourself back to 400 BC, right? 2,500 years ago almost. There was really no distinction between a philosopher and a scientist. Right? I mean, these were the smartest people on the planet. We're talking about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And what's so fascinating is that they were trying to figure out very basic things about the world around them. Right? But they had no scientific method. They had no telescope. It would be 2,000 years before the telescope and the microscope would be invented. And so they just used observation and common sense to figure out things. And the best thing about them is that they got things so wrong, it's comical to look back at it now that we have science. So for instance, Socrates famously thought and propagated the idea that everything revolves around the earth, right? Which we now know is not the case. But think about him, right? So here, it's 2,500 years ago. He's standing on the earth. He doesn't feel the earth revolving. Right? He sees the sun come up over here, and at night it goes up over there, and then what do you know? It happens again with predictable frequency. Right? It made total sense because common sense was all he had and his powers of observation. And I could go on and on with the Greeks. I mean, they're so great. So this guy on the third from the left on the bottom, you might recognize him from his drawing, is Anaximenes. He thought that everything was made of air. And hard things were cold air, right? You touch a stone, it's cold, it's very hard. And rarefied air was fire, right? But everything was made of air. And this other guy down here, Democritus in the far corner, he thought that everything was made of molecules, right? So he was a smart guy in the room. He knew it was made of molecules. So he thought that water was made of these round, kind of jelly molecules, and rocks were made of hard, craggly molecules, and air was kind of fluffy molecules just floating in the air. But it's funny, but it's, it wasn't at the time. I mean, this is what they thought to be the truth because they were using the powers of observation. And so when common sense is your guide, you make bad decisions. I would argue this is where sales managers are today, right? Smart people trying to do the right things, but there's no science, right? You don't get a sales management degree when you go to most universities. You don't even get a sales degree in most universities, but we put you in sales and we expect you to be sales managers. And so what I want to talk about today is some common beliefs we have with the sales pipeline. They make sense in the absence of science, but when you put a little bit of rigor to them, you can see they're actually the exact wrong things to be doing. So before we get to that, let me give you just a minute or so on our company. So I'm a partner with a company called Vantage Point, and we train sales managers. If you leave here with nothing else, knowing nothing other than when I talk about pipelines, know that we train sales managers. It's our the only population we train because we think they're the most important role in every sales force. We also are very committed to doing research. I'm going to share a bunch of research with you. There's a book there, Cracking the Sales Management Code, we wrote, which is based on some research into reporting. It's kind of interesting. And we think that selling today is not like selling was 20 years ago. Therefore, sales management can't be like sales management was 20 years ago, and yet our sales managers grew up being managed 20 years ago. And so only by doing research can we understand exactly today what are the right things for sales managers to be doing. I'd also say a couple more things. First, we are really focused on execution. Right? So I say we train sales managers. We don't have a generic leadership program. We don't even have a generic coaching program. We think that coaching is only as important as the task it's directed at. So we teach people how to coach to the sales pipeline. We teach people how to coach during forecasting conversations. We think that coaching is very specific, and we try to drive better behaviors and very specific sales management activities. And the final one here is that we think sales management is a new source of ROI. So here's some results we have. Anyone who stands before you and gives a case study is going to give you amazing numbers like this. Revenue increased, quotas increased. I'd just say that we accomplish these things without ever training a salesperson. So the idea that you can train 1/10 of your sales force and get a greater impact than training your salespeople directly, because you've probably trained them again and again and again, is in many ways a mind-opening thought to a lot of organizations. Just by training sales managers, you can drive a huge amount of improvement in salespeople's performance. So I'm happy for you to learn more, chatting afterward. But back to this question about what does common sense tell us about sales pipelines. So I'm going to share with you three myths, if you will, that common sense has driven into our organizations. And then I'll share some data with you to kind of point back to what the science would say. And this is actually, I spoke at Dreamforce last year, and there were 5, but we're constrained in time, so you get 3. So if you want to see the other 2, I'd encourage you to visit our website. It's vantagepointperformance.com. There's a resource center there that has great videos and webcasts and other things that you can pick up. But let's start with the first one. This is the best. I can't say enough about this. Bigger is better, okay? This is the most foundational belief in all of sales pipeline management, that bigger. How many people think in your organization there's an implicit understanding that a bigger pipeline is a better sales pipeline? Oh, okay. I'm just going to say this is food coma that's set in, and people can't actually gather the strength to raise their hands. So I fly out of Charlottesville, Virginia. It's a teeny little airport. We have 3 gates, one for each of the major airlines, right? Words never spoken at Charlottesville Airport, we're number 2 for departure. Right? Never spoken. Words I've never heard spoken in a business-to-business sales force, your pipeline is too big. It's too big. It's ridiculous. You got to get some stuff out of that sales pipeline. Right? It's just not the way we think about it. And I'm going to share with you an experience I had working with one of our clients, a big client of ours, that really opened my eyes to this idea. So these, as you can see, are representations of sales pipelines. And so on the top is the average sales pipeline in this organization. So 125 sales managers, probably 400 salespeople. They sold expensive things, right? So the average sales pipeline, $41 million. Then there was this one sales manager. Let's call him Diego, because his name is actually Diego. And I think it's such a great name, I can't say it enough. I can't believe one of my children's name is not Diego. So Diego, rock star sales manager. Right? Every leader in the organization wanted to have more Diegos reporting to him or her. Every salesperson wanted to report to Diego, rock star. When we looked at this and we thought, well, this is kind of interesting. His sales pipeline is 25% smaller, or his salespeople's pipelines on average, than the rest of the organization. And if you looked at this and didn't know this was Diego's pipeline, what's the obvious conclusion? Diego. What's going on here, my man? Right? This is trouble brewing. But what was so interesting is when we looked at the actual productivity of his sales reps during this period we had studied had closed 50% more stuff with 25% smaller sales pipelines than his peers. Interesting. And then when we looked at the amount of forecasted deals and revenue that were being actually realized, also a dramatic difference. So this kind of proved this idea and started us thinking about the fact that actually smaller pipelines can really be more productive pipelines given some things, right? I'm going to talk about those things in a second. But here's the fundamental question, right? So how big is big enough? Let's assume for a moment there can be a too big. So if you're the most ancient of organizations, you say the bigger pipeline is better. Slightly more sophisticated organizations will say, well, we need 3x or 4x or 5x, right? How many people in your organization have some kind of target like that? Right? It's just known that it's 3x or 2x. This has got to be food coma. I don't understand what's that. We just take a little break and stretch, and people are driving me crazy. This is an unheard of restraint in the organization to confess to things that I know happen to be true. So most organizations will say, we need some multiple of our target. And the reality of it is, as you know, it depends. Right? Some salespeople can get away with some big pipelines. Some people can probably get away with small pipelines. In that case, Diego had a smaller pipeline. It was getting him where he needed to go. So let me give you just a second here. This is a little bit of this is part of one of our training programs. We believe a salesperson needs to be able to very simply calculate the appropriate size of their sales pipeline. And it has to be back of the envelope, simple calculation. Right? I know an organization that said they spent 3 months trying to calculate the win rate inside their organization. Don't do that. Bad idea. So things for us, when we talk about sales management and salespeople and the conversations they have, we want things to be as simple as possible. And it's not because salespeople aren't smart. In fact, they're more educated than the general population on average. It's because salespeople don't have time. And if the conversation is not simple and meaningful, sales managers and salespeople don't want to have that conversation. And so when we think about how big the sales pipeline should be, it comes down to something so simple, which actually is where you get the 3x and 2x. We start with the salesperson's quota, and then we mix in with that their deal win rate. Right? And this is kind of the fundamental basis of the 2x, 3x, but we can do it at an individual salesperson's level. And the math looks like this. Right? You take an individual salesperson's quota per period, and you divide that by their win rate per period. Right? And it gives you an ideal sales pipeline. Just to do simple math, I mean, you're all analytic people, I'm sure, can get to this pretty quickly, but if I have a $1 million quota, and I'm a pretty good salesperson, I close half of my deals, I need a $2 million pipeline. Right? I mean, it's simple as can be. But what if I'm a new sales rep, or I'm someone who's not as good at what I do, and my win rate's only 25%? Still got a $1 million quota, I need a $4 million sales pipeline. Simplest of math, but here's the reality. If I'm managing this organization, and I'm not looking into the reps level, I look at this and go, we need 3x in our sales pipelines. And I tell everyone in the organization we need 3x in our sales pipelines, and the sales rep on the bottom misses their quota. Sales rep on the bottom loses their job. Sales rep on the bottom goes to your competition. And if the other sales management team is more enlightened and better than you are, now you've got someone out kicking your ass in the marketplace because you told them 3x was the right number. So this matters. I mean, it seems like a very simple thing, but it's not, and it is a simple thing, but it's not inconsequential. Right? Each salesperson should be able to know exactly what the right size sales pipeline is. We shouldn't just be lathering stuff on top and saying, this is how you'll succeed, this is how you'll fail, because some will succeed, some will fail. So conventional wisdom would say bigger is always better. Informed wisdom says right-sized is best. And there's a pretty simple way to get there if you don't spend 3 months trying to calculate the win rate. All right, here's another good one. Pipelines are for forecasting. Okay, everybody just get your blood flowing in your arms. We're going to do this properly this time, right? How many people in your people have worked for organizations that the primary reason you have a sales pipeline is to create a forecast? Okay, this is starting to look good. People starting to wake up. I got sandwiches and salads. Not too heavy. It's not pasta, but apparently it can put you to sleep. Got it? So this is some people almost think this is a trick question because organizations have such difficulty separating pipeline management from forecasting. Right? They happen in the same conversation. The pipeline review session is really a forecasting session. Right? So here's some more research we did with the Sales Management Association. And we asked people, what's the primary use of your sales pipeline? And we gave them choices. As you can see, the number one response, not surprisingly, is to forecast accurately. This is the reason they use the sales pipeline, number one reason. But the others are actually more interesting, to judge rep performance, to review rep activities, to help close deal, to ID process bottlenecks, to identify skill deficits in the sales force. These are actually important things to the right side of the quote, most important thing. You know, this is actually the important stuff, right? All the things to the right of forecasting are actually about improving performance today. Forecasting is about predicting the future. Two very different things. And when I say pipeline management, I mean quite discreetly, how do you build a healthy pipeline and how do you win more deals that are inside it? I do not mean when I say pipeline management to create a more accurate forecast. And the only analogy I've come up with that really makes sense to me is kind of this difference between guiding a ship as the captain and estimating your time of arrival. Right? Pipeline management is about doing all the right things to keep the ship on course. Right? Are my salespeople making enough calls? Do they have the right deals in the sales pipeline? Is there something more I can do to coach them to win those deals? Is there some way I can help them understand analytically that they need to be doing things different? Like, this is good pipeline management. Saying you're going to get $40 million at the end of the quarter is forecasting. It's just estimating your arrival, and it's not that valuable. Unfortunately, we spend 53 minutes more than once a month primarily doing forecasts. So my counsel is get forecasting over as fast as possible and get to the real business of the day, which is selling more stuff. And I'll give you a little more data and then move on to the final thing here. So we asked people how much time they were spending forecasting. This sales managers, ask them how much time they were spending forecasting per month. And on the y-axis, you have the percentage of sales reps that were making their quota. As you can see, even not being a statistics major, there's not a very strong correlation between spending more time forecasting and more reps making their quota. We also asked them how much time they spent with reps discussing individual deals. Let's call it coaching individual deals. Now it starts to look like a trend. So if nothing else to take away from this section of this presentation, forecasting is not pipeline management. Pipeline management is hugely important when done well. Forecasting is not that important even when done well. Right? I wouldn't say that to your head of sales, but I'll say it to you because you rose your hand at the appropriate point in the presentation. Now we're on better terms here. Forecasting is something that has to be done, but it has to be done fast. Move on to the real things you need to do, which is coaching, using the sales pipeline. So conventional wisdom would say that pipelines are for forecasting. More informed wisdom would say pipelines are for coaching. So let me give you this one last thing here, and I like this one too. Gosh, I probably have 10 of these we could go through if I had more time, but this last one is that the manager's the closer. Okay, so where do managers come from in your organization? So you get hired as a sales rep, you become a rock star salesperson. As a reward, you get promoted to be a sales manager. Your sales managers at one time were probably your best salespeople. And that manifests itself in some curious ways when you watch it, how they interact with their salespeople. So here's just a very generic sales pipeline. Right? I mean, prospecting, you identify an opportunity, you propose a solution, you actually do a proposal, then you close. Right? I mean, however many stages you have, it looks something like this. When we work with sales managers, we break this into early stage and late stage. Right? We say there are behaviors from a coaching and from a selling perspective, but we work with managers. From a coaching perspective, the early stage of the sales pipeline needs to be treated differently from late stage opportunities. Where do you think sales managers love to spend their time? The late stage, right? For a couple reasons. First of all, it's fun. Man, these deals are going to close, right? Within the next 30 days, these deals are going to close. I'm going to come in and be the super salesperson and make this shit happen, right? Because I was a rock star salesperson. I know how to do this better than the people I'm managing. The second reason actually points backward, which is that these deals are on the forecast. These deals that are late stage are highly visible to senior executives, right? So there's a kind of a selfish, silly reason, but there's actually the more urgent reason that here's a deal. It's right in front of your face. You're going to win it or lose it, and you don't want to screw it up. Right? So sales managers gravitate toward the end of the sales cycle because it's fun and it's urgent, but it's not that high impact. You know, earlier in the sales cycle, coaching is great because you can coach the salesperson to qualify or disqualify their opportunities, right? How to get things out of the sales pipeline. The salesperson can influence the buying criteria of the customer. They can influence the way they're positioning themselves relative to the competition. They basically set themselves up to win a late stage deal earlier in the deal. And let me go back to Diego. Diego. I cannot believe my son's name is not Diego. Oh well. So anyway, back to Diego. So as you know, we had kind of smaller sales pipelines, and they were more productive. But when we looked at it deeper, we also saw that Diego's team was doing 50% more prospecting than the rest of the organization. So now we've got Diego's team doing 50% more prospecting, 25% smaller sales pipelines, but that were much more productive. And so when we looked at Diego, I mean, we studied Diego a lot, right? Because this is at this time in our development as an organization, our thinking, we kind of knew this was fun information, but we didn't really know exactly how to articulate it. So when we looked at Diego relative to the other sales managers, he didn't seem smarter. He had taken pretty much the same curriculum through his career. You know, he'd had kind of the same experiences and come up in the same organization. The only thing Diego did differently that we could tell was he had, rather than one pipeline meeting, he had two pipeline meetings. So obviously on Friday afternoon, he had a pipeline review session, which was basically a forecasting session. Every sales manager did it because the forecast was due Monday morning. But on Tuesday morning, he had a separate meeting, which was just to go over new opportunities that his salespeople had uncovered. And it was like he was a hockey goalie just sitting in front of his pipeline. It's like, don't put that in. Don't put that in my pipeline. Don't put that in my pipeline. And literally, he would spend 1 hour every week just keeping deals out of the sales pipeline. I've never seen anything like it. It's like being number 2 for departure. All he did was disqualify opportunities and do better coaching early in the sales cycle. More prospecting, smaller pipelines, more sales. Interesting. Very interesting. So as you might expect, we put together a training program based on these observations. It's actually called it pipeline coaching, which is kind of not intentionally even our current pipeline management program. And these are the win rates in the beginning, right? So pre-training, these are the win rates. 9 months post-training, and 24 months post-training. Right, so basically, over a 24-month period, by teaching these people to engage early in the sales process, disqualify bad opportunities, and teaching them to coach better to individual opportunities, we pulled everyone else's performance up to the level of Diego's, just by changing the way they thought about the sales pipeline. We didn't even teach them really coaching techniques. We just put the framework in place to do it at a different time with a different intent. Incredibly powerful stuff. So the manager is actually not the closer, as fun as it is. The manager is the cleaner of the sales pipeline. He is the goalie standing in front, protecting the pipeline from trash that will bounce around and make your sales cycles look longer and waste your salespeople's times and frustrate senior leadership because the win rates are so low. It's a big, big deal. So let me just give you one final thought here, and then I'll close. I was having a conversation. I was in a sales call, actually. I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. And so we had 2 people on the phone. We had a learning and development professional, and we had an RVP of sales in this organization. So the L&D professional had kind of found us online, come to us and seen our research, and said, we really need some help with our sales pipeline. Our senior team is frustrated because it's so inconsistent from region to region, and the performance is not where it needs to be. We suspect these things are unhealthy. I'd love for you to talk to this RVP of sales because he's very influential, and if we can get him on board, we can get the rest of the team on board. So now we're on the phone with the RVP of sales. So we go through something, not this presentation, but kind of highlighting what we did, what the purpose of the learning objectives were. And his comment took me a while to understand. He said, this just seems kind of basic. I think this would be useful for my new sales managers, but some of my sales managers have been, managing pipelines for 15 years, 20 years. And we got off the phone, and the L&D person was so frustrated, she said, that's the problem. And here's what I would caution you about things like pipeline management and forecasting and coaching. Don't confuse comfort with a task with competence at the task. Because when you start talking to sales managers, they've been in the organization for 25 years, they were a superstar salesperson, they've been in a management role for 15 years, they got this down. They might think it's insulting to teach them how to manage a sales pipeline and to teach them how to forecast and to teach them how to coach because they've had coaching classes, they've read coaching books. Just because they're comfortable with their role doesn't mean they're extremely competent in the role. They're like the philosophers 2,400 years ago who are doing the best they can, right? They see the world around them. It makes common sense the pipeline should be bigger. It makes common sense they should swoop in at the end of the deal and try to save it. It makes common sense, that they should be doing the other thing I said. Jeez, what can you do? I thought I was a professional with this. Jesus Christ. But anyway, let me get off stage, and if you have questions, I'm going to be over here unmiking and doing that stuff. Let me just leave you with this. This is incredibly important stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff you can do in an organization. There's nothing more important than managing the pipeline well. Build a healthy pipeline and get more deals through it. There's a lot of common sense bouncing around most organizations that's that's counterproductive. And when you introduce a little bit of rigor, a little bit of discipline, and can prove your points with a little bit of insight and get that suspension of disbelief that a smaller pipeline can be bigger, we've seen companies really make huge strides in the productivity of their sales force. So with that, I thank you. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too.